Looks like it might be live now. Is that right?
No, not yet. Sorry, it's recording and YouTube is different.
Gotcha.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, 7 o'clock. I'll call this meeting to order. Can we do a roll call?
Member Chomsky.
Present.
Member Hoff.
Present.
Member Schneider.
Present.
Chair Bowman.
Present. All right, I'm going to read the land acknowledgement statement. The city of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lisjan. We acknowledge that genocide took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The city of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. The second item after the roll call that we have on today's agenda is the approval of the minutes from March 17th. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve.
I'll second that.
All right. Member Chomsky.
Yes.
Member Hoff.
Yes.
Member Schneider.
Yes.
And Chair Bowman.
Yes. All right, the next item on the agenda is announcements. Does any staff member or committee member have any announcements? I know we had a few follow-up questions last meeting about city council compensation and whatnot. I can leave that to the discussion section, if that makes sense. But otherwise, if there's no announcements, I'm going to move on. Next item on the agenda is public comment. It doesn't look like, it looks like we do have someone in the audience. I'll turn this over to a member of the public. Looks like Jeremiah.
Okay. Anne, do you have the timer?
I have it, but it's not on the video. So go ahead and let him start talking and I will share the timer.
Okay. Jeremiah, you're on.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Good evening, members, and you can hear your voice.
Is anyone else having trouble hearing, or is it just me?
Yeah, I can.
Yes, I
It's
can't
all
hear.
broken.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was my connection or not.
Is it Jeremiah? Can you still hear me okay?
Barely, it's going in and out.
Barely going in and out, huh? Okay, well, I'll
Is there
try
a
my best. I just want to say one thing.
Better now.
Better.
Is there a possibility?
Oh, I was
something?
going to ask if there was a possibility of doing this public comment later in the meeting. Maybe the connection, Jeremiah's connection, will be better later. But let's give it a try.
Okay. Well, I was just wanting to say, if you could hear it, this charter review committee can do anything to support school zones in Albany for the municipal code book, and also a possible discussion on creating our own Albany food bank or food pantry within our city limits, sponsored by the Alameda County food program. That's it.
I believe he says that's it.
All right, I heard the comment on school zones and food bank within the city limits. I think we'd have to get that approved in a work plan and confirm that they're actually items within the city charter. I don't know off the top of my head. Does anybody know if either of those two items are within the charter?
The food bank is not, a school zone is not.
Then I might advise, because it doesn't seem like this is directly in our purview, there's a more appropriate committee to take those two items to. It seems like we'd have to add something specific to the charter to include those two items, and they're likely not within our current scope. Any other comments or questions related to that? All right, if there's no other comments from the public, we'll move on to presentations. I don't think we have any specific presentations planned, so we can move to discussion and potential action items related to the work plan. The first item on the work plan is lowering the voting age. I definitely have something to report here. So what I can report after our previous meeting, I was in touch with the president of the Albany School Board to understand if they'd be interested in having a discussion at one of the school board meetings on this topic. I think the answer is yes, they would be willing to have a discussion and potentially have a vote in terms of whether or not the school board supports lowering the voting age to 16 in Albany on the issue. The school board was also going to ask its student members if they were interested in championing this topic or could run a survey within the school, understanding interest in the topic. But that being said, I also wanted to look into, before we actually had the school board vote on anything, I reached out to the city of Berkeley to understand what's going on with this initiative in Berkeley and Oakland, because if you recall, in Berkeley, they passed an initiative to lower the voting age for school board elections to 16 in 2016, and they did the same thing in Oakland in 2020. So I spoke to a lawyer that the city of Berkeley is working with to actually implement this measure. And what's happened is essentially the measure basically authorizes the city council to put this into place, the 16-year-old voting for school board into place, after they conduct a feasibility assessment. And the city's been working with the organization that runs the software for the voting systems in Alameda County, as well as the Alameda County voter registrar, on making this happen. And they've run into some challenges in modifying the systems to make this happen. In San Francisco, there was some precedent where they actually allowed non-citizens to vote in municipal elections and were able to generate a separate ballot for that separate group of people. But it's actually a different software vendor that runs those elections. So in Alameda County, this got held up with the pandemic and all the challenges with voting in 2020 in general. So they've gotten to a place now where they think there's a viable solution, and they're working with a consulting firm to do like scenario planning, to look at various scenarios that could come up and understand if there's a way to troubleshoot through each of those. And then the vendor, which is named Runbeck, is coming up with a cost estimate. And they don't expect to have that till this summer. Once they have that, then independently, the city of Berkeley and the city of Oakland would need to determine if they want to actually put this in place. In Berkeley, it's to be funded by the school district, and in Oakland, it's to be funded by the city. So there's a small chance they could make these changes. The vendor could pay for the software update, and then the city council could move forward and adopt the proposal to allow 16-year-olds to vote in 2022. The costs that we're waiting on are both the one-time cost to adopt, to basically change the software to allow the separate ballot to occur and the separate counting. And the other piece is the county or the city would likely have to deploy teams of people, like an extra team, to monitor voting for this new group. So that's the cost we're waiting on. There might be some synergies if another city like Albany was added to the mix, where some of those teams could be shared. But honestly, we're not quite there yet. So I'm proposing, all that said, that we wait until we have a cost estimate before we go back to the school board to get an opinion on if they think this is worth pursuing in Albany.
And how soon would you expect a cost estimate?
I was told this summer.
Okay.
And I take it Albany uses the same vendor, Runbeck.
Yeah, so Runbeck basically runs the elections for Alameda County.
Is there a way to project how the cost that Berkeley incurs would trickle down if Albany tried to do the same thing later? Because they've kind of paved the way, so maybe some of the upfront costs would be lower, and also we're a smaller city, so the amount of data is smaller. Is there any way to make a projection?
Yeah, I think there's both like the one-time cost of making the software change, and they said Runbeck may actually end up funding that, but I don't think that's been determined yet. So that may potentially be moot. And then there's ongoing costs after the fact to deploy those teams. I'll ask the question once they identify what those costs would be, if adding a new team or adding additional jurisdiction, I guess, would add to those costs, or if they could be shared or spread across between various counties or various cities within the county.
And even if they're additive, I'm wondering if the cost for Albany would be the same number as the cost for Berkeley, or if it would be scaled by the population size, or maybe somewhere in between those two.
Yeah, maybe there's fewer team members or something like that. But I mean, what I took away from this conversation is it probably doesn't make sense to put this back in front of the school board until we get the full picture on feasibility and cost. In the meantime, the school board can assess what the interest is from the student participants from the school board and the matter in general. And they suggested a survey of students if the student members of the school board were interested in doing something like that. So that could happen in the meantime, but otherwise I didn't think it made sense to move on this issue until we learned more.
So do you have a sense of how long a delay that is? Or it sounds like some of those steps can be taken by some of the informal, like survey type things can be done now, and they'll just take as long as they take. But if we wait to get more information about what Berkeley's doing, do you have a sense of when we'd be likely to have that information in hand?
I was originally told we'd have it at the end of April, but I think there were some delays on.
Okay,
the
but we
vendor
don't
consultancy.
necessarily have to wait till after the election to get that information.
No, I think it should. I'm now told the timelines this summer.
Okay, that's good to know.
Broadly, I think early summer is what I was told. But the city of Berkeley is actively working on this, and this attorney is regularly meeting with the county registrar and Runbeck, the vendor. So I feel good that we're definitely going to learn something at some point, but I don't know that it makes sense to start spinning things up in Albany and trying to come down on either side of the issue without having the whole full fact base.
So it's likely in terms of our meeting schedule that we'd have that cost information either at our July meeting or our September meeting.
Yeah, I think that's definitely reasonable.
Okay.
And I'll follow up again with Sarah, the school board president, to understand if what the student members of the school board, I think there are 2 student members of the school board, what their perspective was, because I haven't heard back on that. Any other questions or comments on that topic?
No, nothing for me.
Not for me. Thank you for all that.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So the other item was city council compensation. Are there any updates from any of the committee members on this topic?
First, I would like to know if staff was able to find out whether Albany has the ability to raise pay by ordinance, since the charter does reference Government Code Section 36516A as far as that, establishing that pay. And subpart 4 of that section allows city councils to raise, there's a certain mechanism, but basically to raise up to a certain limit by ordinance.
Yes, so we found that compensation could be increased up to 5% by amendment to the charter.
Only by amendment to the charter.
That's correct.
Okay, so it's not. Subpart 4 under A is not part of what is referenced in the charter. It's interesting that there would be a limit up to 5% for charter cities.
So and let me add a little bit to that. What John reported is what we heard from the city attorney, and it's based on the ballot originally that amended the charter for that section. And the original intention is, I dug out the original impartial analysis of the city attorney as well as arguments in favor and against. And in there it says, the amendment, if approved by a voter, would provide for a council member salary of $300 per month starting December 15, 2010. If the state modifies the amount for general law cities, Albany City Council member salary could also be modified. So it's a city attorney's impartial analysis that says basically it's not the original intention is just the amendment part is just for the actual stated amount. And not the subsection 4. And also in the argument in favor, it also said this charter change would go into effect in 2010, and any changes in the future would be made by the state legislature.
Okay.
So
Thank
I must admit I'm a little confused at this point. Did we hear a minute ago that a charter amendment would allow the city to raise the compensation by up to 5%, or that I was under the impression a charter amendment would allow us to change it however the amendment reads, with no particular limits. Can you
Correct, but
clarify
I
that?
think the original question is if without a charter amendment, because there's that subsection 4, can the council compensation be increased by whatever amount not exceeding 5%? Because that was subsection 4 to 3, what was the number? 36516A.
Mhm.
So the response we got back is no, just because it referenced the 36516A doesn't mean that the increase up to 5% is also part of our charter. So to have an increase or a change from the $300, unless the state legislature changed the general law city amount from 300, say, to $350 or $400, we would need a charter amendment to change from the $300 now.
So is it the case that the state has not changed that 300 number in the time since?
Yes.
Okay. And there's no particular reason to think that they will anytime soon.
Correct.
Right? So the bottom line is, without a charter amendment, we can't change the compensation at all. And with the charter amendment, we can change the compensation to any system that the amendment specifies.
Well, it sounds like we could change by 5% without a charter amendment.
I don't hear that there is that limit. I don't see a basis for that.
Yeah.
And with Harry, I was puzzled by that up to 5% with the charter amendment comment.
So is it correct to say that without a charter amendment, the city can't change the compensation in any way until the state takes action?
Correct.
And with the charter amendment, the amendment could be written to specify the new compensation level at whatever amount
Correct.
we choose as writers of the amendment, and then it just has to be approved by voters.
Correct.
Okay, so the 5% is really a red herring as far as we're concerned. We don't need to consider that anymore.
It's only in consideration if we want to, like the original intention is to match other general law cities. But we are a charter city, so
And it's not.
we could do whatever amount that the voter approves. But the original intention is why the charter is worded that way is to match other general law cities.
Just for that initial amount.
Right.
In theory, it sounds like if we thought it was the best thing to do, we could propose a charter amendment that would include subpart 4 and put that on the ballot. And the reason that might be a good way to go is that I understand from an article written by the city attorney of the city of San Pablo about 10 years ago that that 5% per year, you can do a big catch up. So if you haven't raised the salary for X years, you can have X years times up to 5%. So that it might be worth exploring, just doing incorporating subpart 4 by a charter amendment. And then that would, I think, allow Albany to do a catch up. Of course, we'd want to get, the attorneys, our own attorney's opinion about that. And then we could be in sync with California general law cities as far as what we pay. Or we can choose to go in some other fashion.
Was there any other information that we had hoped for staff to provide at this meeting? I remember I thought we came up with a few questions that staff was going to research. Was that the only one?
I think we also asked if there were more information regarding benefits the city council was getting, because if you recall, if you added the salary plus benefits, Albany was in the middle of the road with peer cities. But if you just looked at salary alone, Albany was on the lower end of the bell curve. And the comp for Albany was also distorted by one or two higher benefit numbers.
Yeah, so about that, the benefits, the package allows for enrollment to the city health and dental plan fully paid. It's an all or nothing benefit. And there's also CalPERS for which certain members can apply to or to which the CalPERS applies to and certain that don't. So that's cause for most of the discrepancy for the benefits.
So just to clarify, are you saying that the high number that we saw in the benefits for a few members was mostly due to CalPERS rather than due to health and dental?
I can't speak specifically to any particular member's benefits, but yeah, seemingly the discrepancies were based that some could receive the CalPERS benefits and others could not.
And where does that rule come from? Is that from the charter, or is that something about a union contract?
No, that's PERS law.
Can you say anything about?
Can you expand on that? Yeah.
About like what groups of people are eligible and what groups are not?
So we don't have more information than what John basically stated, because it's a very complicated way of calculating things, and that's not something in neither one of us expertise. So that perhaps it needs to be coming from the finance director, but what she indicated to us is, there's the difference between whether they elect to enroll in health or dental care, and the other thing that John mentioned was the CalPERS stuff. So, and council benefit is actually not in the purview of Charter Review Committee. So that's not something that the Charter Review Committee should be discussing.
Yeah, just to second that, in the same article that I was citing from the city attorney of the city of San Pablo, there's actually a government code section that indicates the area of health benefits provided to city council members is a matter of statewide concern and not a municipal affair, which a municipal affair or not is the kind of the deciding point for whether something could be in a charter.
So in terms of the scope of our discussion, it sounds like we should be looking at the wage compensation number alone and kind of ignore the benefits part if that's not supposed to be in our purview. Like when we want to compare Albany to other cities, we shouldn't be comparing that sum to other cities. We should just be looking at the compensation part or the wage part of it and comparing that to other cities? Is that
That's not necessarily true. Because there are some cities, perhaps they don't offer benefit to, or there, I don't know, maybe there aren't a benefit offered to certain city council members and versus others. And so when you're comparing, the full package is still what matters, but it's just that the benefit part of it is not something that we can discuss or amend the charter for.
Who, this is more for educational purposes, but who actually makes that decision then about the benefits? If some cities are doing it and some cities are not, and it's not in the charter.
I know for the medical and dental, that is council policy.
So the council can make that determination.
There was a, I don't remember exactly what year, but one, they did sunset their what was that called? The in lieu of medical. I can't remember if it's 2008 or 2010, something like that. So many years ago, if council choose not to elect to enroll in medical payment, or I'm sorry, medical insurance, they could get money in lieu of that.
And they removed that.
They removed that.
And then the other question I have, just as we're thinking about how Albany compares to other cities, is the numbers that we were looking at that included benefits. Do we know if that's specific to premiums being paid for those benefits, or does it also include like actual claims that the city is paying out on? In other words, is the city like self-insured and paying out claims? Because there's a big outlier there, and I'm trying to understand if that was from like claims itself, or if the benefits are just that expensive and the package is that valuable.
That I don't know.
Okay.
But again, this committee should not be discussing about the benefit. So I know it's a hard part to distinguish and break apart. And especially after what I said, that we should compare the whole package, but that's really not something that this committee should be discussing.
Okay, no, it makes sense.
So maybe to paraphrase what Anne is saying, we should consider the benefit as a done deal. We can't control it, we can't modify it, we can't discuss modifying it, but we can use it as part of the baseline to decide what we want to do with the wage part.
And we can acknowledge that it's part of the total compensation. And as we discussed, I think a number of meetings ago, this trend a number of years ago, prior to Obamacare, of California cities offering more robust or offering health benefits to council members was really an attempt to attract a more diverse pool of candidates, people who might not have access to employer-provided health care, for example. So it's kind of part of the history, I think, of attempts to figure out how to make councils more diverse.
Thank you, both of you. Well paraphrased.
So if we're thinking about the whole package, but specifically only have purview over the wages, I'm interested in revisiting exactly how the wages compare Member Schneider, I remember you did some analysis on that. Do you happen to have that handy or remember what the total
It was,
takeaways were?
yeah, but it was, it was based, Albany would probably have been on par with other cities of similar size at the time we adopted the $300 amount, but then general law cities were able to increase up to 5% a year. And so Albany got, out of sync with general law cities. And the data set that I had did not flag cities that were general law versus charter cities. I mean, you can sort of maybe make some assumptions based on that $300 plus up to 5%, but yeah.
Chair Bowman, when do you want to take public comment?
I prefer we complete like this part of our conversation and we can move to public comment. Is there, it looks like we do have someone with their hand up.
But I did want to say that the overall compensation was a little bit higher than for other cities of similar size.
Any other comments on that?
Generally, to the extent we can figure out what might be keeping less diverse people from running as candidates, that'll help us figure out what incentives would be valuable. And without thinking that through and maybe getting some experience from other cities, I guess my concern is if we were just to sort of blindly say, let's, really increase the base compensation. My fear would be that the same people would be running, the same white upper income folks would be running and winning. So I really want us to think about what, to the extent we can figure out or extrapolate either from, Albany Census Tract information and sort of the history of where city council members and school board members tend to come from within Albany, just to try to figure out what might be disincentivizing more diverse candidates from running.
I would agree with that. I just was thinking about, if we've been, this 5% number floats around, and if you give somebody 5% on $300, that's only $15 a month. I wouldn't see that as a very large incentive for somebody to run for office. I think that there are probably other, as you pointed out, Ms. Schneider, that there are probably other factors that would be thrown into that. So I'm basically agreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah. For example, the cost of mounting a campaign, which is not necessarily personally borne by the candidates, they fundraise, but there's actually a pretty interesting set of blog posts by former city council member Michael Barnes looking at campaign spending in the 2020 election. He has a blog, it's mb4albany.org. And it looked like for the 2020 election, candidates spent from a little over $5,000 to up to $15,600. And again, it's not necessarily out of the personal wealth of the candidate, but that, the costs of running an Albany-wide election or a campaign could be part of what is disincentivizing folks from running. And that was what I think Michael Barnes was kind of thinking might be going on.
It's
And
also,
Mhm.
yeah, I agree with that. And it's also hard to untangle financial costs from personal costs, like the amount of time it takes to run a campaign and to serve on the council. And I know that there's definitely research showing that people with higher incomes can have more, essentially can arrange their lives to have more free time available for things like political work.
Mhm.
So that's an issue of diversity that we can't really make headway in by changing the compensation. So I do think it's really important, as Member Schneider said, if we're going to invest taxpayer money in trying to solve this diversity problem, let's see if we can make sure we're getting good bang for the buck, that we're investing it in a way that's going to make a difference and that's going to address something that's a real problem for people. And I just don't know any way to evaluate that question, because I mean, you suggested we could look at who has run for office, and I'm sure we would find that in general, wealthier people are more likely to run for office, but there's any number of reasons that may be the case.
Mhm.
And it's hard to know what we can do as the Charter Review Committee to try to change that in a way that would be effective. So I just don't, I feel a little bit lost, and I did a couple of quick Google searches to try to see if there's any research about this, and I didn't find anything. Has anyone else?
I did the same, some Googles, and what I was finding was that there were some larger cities like Dallas, Fort Worth, some city in Florida that there were larger cities. They already had higher salaries, and they wanted even higher salaries. And the argument that they were making in some cases was to attract a more diverse candidate pool, but there wasn't, at least in the Google searching that I was seeing, there wasn't backup for that. And in at least one case, the voters of Fort Worth didn't buy the general argument that they should pay their folks, their council members more. So I haven't offhand seen anything that would, give Albany the benefit of some real world experiments, which I would love to see. But just looking at the census tract data and thinking about it, the census tract that is mostly the graduate student housing for KALB has a fairly high number of Asian Pacific Island and Hispanic folks, at least for the household members or who are graduate students. It could very well be that the reason they're not running for office is that they're in graduate school and they don't have a lot of time.
And also they may not have lived in Albany.
Probably, yeah. So, pardon me.
Go ahead.
No, I said that's sort of a transient population also.
That's also what I was going to say.
That would not be invested in city government.
They may not have lived in Albany for very long, and they may not be planning to continue to live in Albany for very long if they're just here for, 5 years of schooling. That's not, I think many of the people who run for offices tend to have lived in the community for 10, 15, 20 years and have more of a commitment to getting to know a lot of people in the community and trying to steer it in a direction that will help us all in the future. And that's a kind of investment that I think people don't want to make when they're more mobile.
Yeah. And I would love to have young, smart people, in city council, but I think, the fact that we really haven't had many, if any, city council members or school board members from that census tract may be something that, there are really fundamental reasons why they don't have the time or the interest to run for positions.
So is that something you were able to confirm? Maybe I missed that census tract hasn't had participation.
Michael Barnes did some kind of anecdotal, but also some historical plotting of where city council and school board members came from up to, I think, late 2020. And it was overwhelmingly from the 2 eastern census tracts.
In Albany.
In Albany, yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha.
There's 6 census tracts, 2 in the west that are lower income relative to the rest of Albany, 2 in the middle that are kind of in the middle, and then 2 in the east, and they're higher. And that's a little less than, at least from old census information, a little less than 30% of Albany's citizens lived in those 2 eastern tracts and probably still do live there. But that's the source overwhelmingly of the city council and school board members, at least up until about 2020 per
Got it.
council members Barnes's evaluation.
I'm somewhat new at this. Is the east-west dividing line San Pablo Avenue, or is there a nominal dividing line east-west Albany?
There are 6 census tracts.
Okay, so it is 6 tracks.
There are 2 of them in the west, 2 of them kind of central, and 2 in the east. And I without a map right in front of me.
I can look that up. I'll look that up after the meeting. I need to do all
Yeah.
this. Okay, thank you.
While we have a lull here, I'm going to go ahead and suggest we take public comment. Looks like we have one member of the public with their hand up.
And do you have the timer?
Just go ahead. I'm having trouble with the videos and sharing, so I'm running the timer.
I'm pretty good at using my 3 minutes. I'll keep it fair. So I'm going to speak on 2 things here. Age limit to vote and also city council compensation. The way I see it as just Jeremiah, I think that 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds should be able to vote if they will be turning 18 at any point in time during the period of their elected city council members. It's a 4-year term, and I think they should have the right to vote, even though they're a little young, but it encourages people to vote. And I think something good could come out of that. So I can't make any decisions on that, but that's what I would say. Also, where are the precincts going to be located? Now, regarding city council compensation, the way I believe city council compensation should work is that leaders should not be in office for any personal financial gain or to be greedy or selfish about what they should get out of it, including the light fare, including having money for dinner before the meeting. I think leaders should be in office only for one reason: to serve their community and their voters, and to give back to the community, not take money from already struggling citizens to pay for themselves. If any support from the citizens should come from local businesses with their overflow at the end of the day, whether or not a restaurant has extra food to feed seniors or unhoused individuals, there's free dinner every night, or just any overflow or abundance from our businesses, whether it be flowers. Instead of going into the trash, we should be recovering that, and that should be given out free to our citizens. So I am running for Albany City Council, and to tell you the truth, anything I'm compensated I'm going to give right back to the community, whether it's $20,000, $300 a month, $30 a commission. I'm going to turn that right around and turn it into something great. That money is going to go to pay for homeless people's food or give back to the local businesses. The money's not for me, it's for the community. That's all I need to say.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Doesn't look like it.
All right. I think that perspective was clear on both issues. I think I personally am still interested in understanding what Member Schneider is getting at is as to whether increasing compensation would actually encourage participation from underrepresented groups or economically disadvantaged groups. So perhaps that's an action item we can take before our next session, is trying to find evidence, if there is any evidence that has occurred elsewhere, if anyone has done research on that topic. Otherwise, I was just looking back at some of the data. It looks like from a wage perspective, Albany was like 20 to 40% below the peer cities, purely looking at wages, depending on how you cut it, but depending on how you cut the size of the cities and whether you look at averages or medians. And I think, like we've postulated, much of that could be from annual increases that have occurred since we last set the pay at $300 a month.
I guess my feeling is if we could snap our fingers and make that discrepancy disappear, get up to the level to be comparable with other cities and set up the annual increase to keep it comparable over time, I would consider that a good outcome, but I'm not sure that the value of it is enough to warrant the effort of putting it on the ballot and asking people to mount a campaign about it. I'm just not sure if it's. I mean, when we considered the voting age idea, we had a lot of research that Chair Bowman dug up that actually made a very convincing case that this was a good idea that would make it a better city. And here I'm feeling a little bit of more ambivalence, and I'm not. I mean, even if we agree that the outcome would be better, I'm not sure how much better it would be. And when I was first considering this idea, I was thinking of suggesting a much higher compensation with the idea that it would possibly bring in a much broader pool of candidates. And I'm just not sure we have the evidence for that. I like the idea that we have a work item to prepare for our next meeting, that we do some research and try to find out if that's the case. But I would need a little bit more guidance, because when I made a small effort to do that over the last couple of weeks, I didn't really find anything. Member Schneider found something, but it was basically a negative or an absence of. You found some results, but what you found was that nobody's really studied it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree that like raising to what is somewhat of an arbitrary benchmark of where the peer cities are at doesn't necessarily solve anything. And we're also talking about taxpayer money. And I mean, we just heard from an example of one prospective candidates for council that it wouldn't affect their decision to run. So I do think it's worth being prudent with how we're spending that money and making sure we're making a change that's actually going to have some sort of effect, and in terms of impacting participation like we would hope it would.
So I would like to do more research as you suggested. I'm not sure I know how, and if others have ideas of how to do it, I would be thrilled if you would do it, or suggest to me some other avenues to try to do it, because I feel a little bit kind of at a dead end here.
All I can say is Google and Google and Google. I also found some, I don't have them in front of me now, but some kind of Bay Area surveys or East Bay surveys of how cities are doing in terms of diversity in their candidate pools and elected candidates. And it was mostly kind of an argument that moving to districts as opposed to at large was showing arguably some benefits for cities that have moved in that direction in terms of getting more diverse candidates. I wouldn't say that it was a slam dunk, but what struck me was that in the survey that I was reading, there wasn't a reference to, one of the things you can do is increase council pay. I'm sorry to be so vague, but basically you just Google and Google and Google and you find footnotes and you hop to those and links, and either you find something or you don't.
I would add that it's probably also worth reaching out to the authors of articles on these subjects, because if they wrote an article or published a paper about it, they're probably pretty invested and connected in the space, and might be able to provide a hypothesis or point us in another direction.
Yeah. So I'll go back to that article that I'm sorry I don't have it print out, but see if I can get a hold of some contacts there.
My visceral feeling, this is totally visceral feeling, that people don't run for a public office in a city probably for financial gain, particularly if it's $300 a month. It's primarily for other reasons. And I know the genesis. It seems to me the genesis of this discussion was that the Shankman, I think the guy whose name was Shankman, the Shankman letter about that Albany was not diverse and that they should consider district elections. And I think, I have not done any research. I think I will make a greater attempt now that I'm kind of part of the group to take a look at this, but that, I don't see, I think it's good to compensate public employees. I think that's a tremendous thing, but I don't know if that would be make a quantum difference in my decision whether I was going to participate in a community election. And I'm sure there are other factors like Ms. Shegman was talking about looking at. And again, that's just my opinion.
I'd like to suggest that we not think about it so much in terms of financial gain, which is a phrase I've heard a couple of times now, but rather of financial hardship. I think what we're not trying to arrange for people to achieve financial gain by running by serving on city council. Nobody's going to, become wealthy by doing this, and we wouldn't want to set up a path for people to become wealthy by doing this. We're trying to remove obstacles. We're trying to make sure that people who work hours for pay for an hourly wage, maybe at multiple insecure jobs, at low-paying jobs, who feel that they can't afford to serve on a city body because it would take time away from the time that they need to spend earning money to feed their family. And the idea of council compensation in the way I'm looking at it is not as a way to reward people for the work they're doing on the council. It's to make it feasible for people to work a few less hours per month and put in this public service in a way that doesn't create financial hardship for them. And for many people who serve on council, it probably makes no difference whether they get $300 a month in compensation or not. But I think for the type of, for the category of people that we're trying to attract, it might make more of a difference than if it was the difference between 300 and 400 or 300 and 1,000 or whatever numbers we're looking at. It's not about a reward. It's about making it possible for people to invest this time in their personal life in something other than their regular job.
That's a good point. Allow them to participate.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity cost of participating. If you're participating in a meeting, you can't be making a wage, especially if it's an hourly wage, or taking care of your family. Any other comments on this issue?
I think my only other comment, and I'm sure I'm repeating myself, I really doubt that it would be allowable to offer means tested compensation. I think equal pay requires that we would make this increase, if we were going to make an increase, available to everyone. And so that, again, that raises the issue of how can we make sure that we're not just giving the same East Albanian white people more money.
Any other comments? All right, then I propose our next meeting in July, hopefully we have an update from the effort with the Alameda County Register of Voters, and potentially have heard back from the school board and the student member participants, and then an action item for council members to, or city or committee members to look into any research again on whether an improvement here and wages would make a difference in participation with the groups that we're trying to encourage to participate. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, I suggest we move on to the next item on the agenda.
I agree.
Right. Future agenda items, I think you could add that it's, again, revisiting these work plan items on the follow-up that I just mentioned. Is there any other future agenda items that anyone has?
Not for me.
No, not for me.
All right, looks like our next meeting will be Thursday, July 21st at 7 p.m. And I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to adjourn.
Second that.
We could just adjourn. No motion is necessary.
All right. Everybody have a good night.
Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you.
Thank you.